Morning, everyone, and welcome to our Food for Thought speaker series, part of the EMPA program. Today, we're honored to have Professor Kristen Denny. She's going to be discussing the second part in her series on the election primer. And this session is going to be on the separation of governmental system of powers in this millennium. So we're very happy to have you for our second session. Very timely. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please keep them to the end. Please keep yourself on mute so we don't disturb the presentation. And then when we open up for Q&A, you can put questions in the chat, or you can click on the participants tab and raise your hand. And we're happy to see everyone. So I'll hand it off. Bill, you want to say a few words?
So for those of you who were able to join our first segment with Kristen, it was very exciting, and we had great discussion, and we all learned a lot. And I think, we're all in the midst of a historic time. It's hard to put, your everyday life in perspective of what will it look like in the rearview mirror. But having somebody, myself, who grew up in the 60s when we were in chaos for quite a while, and we went through it, and actually I would think in many respects came out the other end with a much better society. And then it ebbs and flows, life ebbs and flows. But I think right now we're passing hopefully through part of the crisis and into the opportunity.
That's right.
And it's coming really quick, right? Election coming really quick, hopefully vaccines coming very quick. Change in philosophy and viewing issues like healthcare and education and equality and inequality and living wages and affordable housing. I mean, all these issues have never, the last time I remember them all being together and discussed and concerned and something being done about it was the late 60s and early 70s. So we're so lucky to have Kristen here, who's at the center of many of these, both in her work with electoral politics with local officials like in Washington, D.C., and working with the private sector, and particularly now working in the electoral system. So don't want to change your content, but I hope at some point during today's discussion, you can kind of update us on what the election looks like.
Sure.
And what we might be hearing and seeing about in the next 18 days or whatever it is at this point.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I mean, there's so much here. That's the good news, I guess. The bad news is that there's so much that it's hard to get to everything. But I do want to talk about what you want to talk about. So go ahead and put questions in the chat or raise your hand. But first, I want to talk about kind of like step back a minute and kind of dive into the topic at hand, which is the separation of powers. Now, one of the things that I think people don't realize is that a lot of our rules and mores and norms that surround the separation of powers, besides what's written in the Constitution, which is, remember, high school civics, legislative branch, judiciary, and then executive. That we have basically operated on kind of based on a gentleman's agreement. In other words, there's not a whole lot of laws on the books that kind of guide us on how we're to behave or how people are to respond. And that's the thing, Bill mentioned the 60s. We saw a lot of change initiated after that time in the 60s. I think we're going to see that after this election, or when there's a change in power. And you're going to see that there are going to be laws written that are going to contain the president and hold him personally accountable, him or her, personally accountable. That will happen almost immediately. There's a great story in the New York Times this morning. There are already two lawyers, two attorneys that have been, that works, one Republican, one Democrat, Bob Bowers, the Democrat, I happen to know him. They're already working together to put together like a blueprint of these laws that they hope to, kind of like a bipartisan type of effort to kind of push this through. I think we see that happen sooner rather than later. And it's all because of how Trump has pushed the limits. Now, I will say that right now the guardrails are still the guardrails protecting democracy are still holding. I don't know what's going to happen another 4 years. Some may disagree with me, but Bill, what do you think? You're on mute.
I mean, just a little thing, but not so little, is the use of executive orders to make policy and law, which were always there, but were used only in extraordinary circumstances like threat of war, natural disasters, things where waiting for the legislative process to work its way through would have endangered lives and property.
Right.
The Trump administration has used them routine as like a preferred solution,
Right.
in part because of the disarray in Congress and the lack of bipartisanship, but
Right.
a recognition that they could get away with it.
Right.
So the old norms of you don't make law through executive order has gone by the wayside over the last 4 years. I can't imagine that, well, if that persisted, we really run into this separation of powers danger,
Absolutely.
where the executive is basically not only executing, but legislating.
Right, absolutely. And so that kind of leads us into the other part of our topic here, is how we use the term separation of powers for a reason, because the Constitution was written to make sure that each branch had a check that kept them from gaining too much power. I mean, when you think about it, the Constitution was all about keeping one person from gaining too much power, or people, or a small group of people. So the legislative branch, and again, this is a bit of a review from like our high school civic days. The legislative branch, they are the ones that, which is Congress. They are obviously elected by the people and monitored by the people. In other words, every 2 years, every 6 years, you can vote them out, put somebody else new. The Congress legislates. They also appropriate funds, and they also are the ones that declare war. A president cannot declare war. Okay. Now you've heard like overnight, the president's through executive order has ordered a raid or whatever. That's a little different because the money has to be there to support a war. That's where Congress comes in. Now, the executive branch is the office of the presidency. And again, elected by the people. The primary job of that branch is to represent the people, be the leader of the people, but not only at home, but abroad as well. The president cannot make laws. The president can veto laws, as you very well know, or legislation. The president can also make rules, which is these executive orders, but they can be very easily undone. And you've seen that happen, as these administrations transition, you'll see that happen a lot. That, the new president will rescind some executive order. You've heard a little bit about Trump trying to do this with the wall. The problem with that is building the wall. The problem with that is that he needs money to do that. He cannot appropriate funds. Only Congress can do that. So, and then with the judiciary, which is the most stunning part of this, is the Supreme Court. And traditionally and conventionally, we've tried to keep the Supreme Court from being too politicized for the obvious reason. They need to interpret the law as it is and not have any kind of particular bias towards a party, an ideology, a person. Okay. So there's 9 justices on the Supreme Court right now. There's no law on the books that states that there needs to be only 9. That can be changed. They are appointed for life. Some choose to retire. And when they do, then the whole process starts back up again. Now, obviously, we're in the midst of a Supreme Court nominee, a Supreme Court nomination who's looking to be confirmed by Senate. U.S. Senate confirms. Only the U.S. Senate can confirm. That's Amy Coney Barrett. She is the committee. The Senate committee is going to hold their first vote tomorrow, and then they'll take it to the full Senate for a vote to confirm her. Right now, there's 8 justices, only 8. They're still doing business, and there will be 9 if and when she's appointed, or confirmed rather. The president he or she can appoint anybody they want, anyone they want. It doesn't have to be a lawyer. It doesn't have to be a judge. It just anybody they want. Confirmation is harder when it's not perceived they have the expertise or the experience for the job. So what we've seen which is very stunning with Trump, is he has tried to politicize the court in ways that has never been observed. And you guys kind of have seen it probably. He puts a lot of pressure on the justices to rule one way or the other. He puts pressure on the justices in a public arena, if you will, to take up certain measures. And when they don't, he attacks them personally, kind of his standard, operating procedure in terms of how he tries to intimidate. Back when we were talking, when I say back, when we were talking about Obamacare, we've been talking about Obamacare as far as the courts are concerned for 4 years. But in 2018, when the court ruled against the Trump administration on Obamacare, on a facet of Obamacare, Trump kind of went after them. And then Chief Justice Roberts had to put out a very rare statement, ensuring the public that the judiciary is still independent. This has been extremely difficult for a lot of observers in conventional Washington, if you will. What we're going to see with Amy Coney Barrett is she will get confirmed, probably. There's pretty much nothing to stop her. You've heard a little bit about the nuclear option. When it comes to filibustering, again, I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, only because there's so much to talk about, but you've heard a little bit about that. What the nuclear option is, and it's only really used when it comes to Supreme Court confirmations, is that you don't need a 2/3, you just need a majority. And that's why you see, do you remember earlier when we were talking in the news when Mitt Romney, and when he came out and said that he'll vote for the nominee, that was such a big deal because they were literally counting votes. So the Republicans have the votes to confirm her. She is pretty conservative. The court will skew a little conservative now because you have 3 justices that Trump himself has appointed. Do you remember when Scalia passed away? No, that wasn't the right one. I think it was, hold on. I think it was Justice, hold on. No, okay. Yes, it was Scalia. When he passed away unexpectedly, that was in Barack Obama's term, and the Republicans filibustered it away. And then Trump became president, and then he appointed, so this is kind of how this goes in terms of politicizing this whole Supreme Court justice nomination process. So Roe versus Wade. A reason why this becomes such a political tool for presidents is because there are certain laws that are hot button issues for, their party or certain groups of people. Roe versus Wade always seems to be a very, very heated, emotional thing that people will vote on. Right now, the Senate thinks that this vote for her might excite conservatives or pro-life or that kind, the religious base in a way that kind of gets them out of, in case they're not already energized to vote. That's why the Senate is pushing this through so fast. And there's a couple of down ballot races. And when I say down ballot, I'm talking like Senate races, like in South Carolina and Kentucky, Texas, Alaska, that they they think would help them if they can excite this base of people. So Roe, the thing is about Roe is that it's very rare for the justices to rescind individual rights. I'm not saying it can't happen, but they don't like it. They don't like to do that. So if they repealed Roe, it would be them rescinding personal rights, individual rights of citizens, and they don't like to do that. I think if they do anything with Roe, which by the way, Chief Justice Roberts controls what they take up and when they take it up. So he operates much like the leaders in Congress. He decides what they review. So it's up to him. He's a very pragmatic guy. He was appointed by George W., and he's a very pragmatic guy. Young. When I say young, he's probably 60. You have to remember, that's young for the Supreme Court. And so
that's extremely young in general.
Okay, gotcha. And he's a very pragmatic guy. He very much cares about the rule of law, and he really very much cares that there's this perception that it is independent of politics. So we'll see if they take up Roe. If they do, I think they bounce it back to the states and make it more of a state thing, just to buy themselves some time. Let's talk a little bit about court packing. Have you heard this term recently on the campaign trail about court packing? And it's more of a question for Joe Biden, because if Democrats gain control, they can change. When I say gain control, I mean gain control of the White House and both houses of Congress. They can change how many justices can sit on the Supreme Court. Does anybody have strong feelings about that? More justices on the Supreme Court? Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, that's what they tried to do in the 30s to get the New Deal, more New Deal reforms passed. Mm-hmm. And Talani said it's a dangerous precedent. I would agree it's a dangerous precedent, but I think that it depends on the degree to which you expand the court. I agree that it's a dangerous precedent that if you add too many, then the next Republican president wants to do the same. So there has to be some kind of even split, fairness doctrine style. But yeah, the Republicans are pushing for really activist judges under the guise of not being activists at all. And Amy Coney Barrett is a perfect example of someone who's pretty extreme.
Yeah.
And they're violating the norms of the court in general.
Right.
So I would say, yes, we should expand it.
You do. It's as everything with these issues go, there's a strong pros and cons on each side, right? Because you're right. What's to keep the Republican president from doing the same thing? And then it really becomes a politicized thing. Now, I should point out that even though these presidents go out of their way to pick somebody that they think is liberal enough or conservative enough or is right on certain issues, that doesn't mean they have to act accordingly. They can rule however they want. And there's already been, Trump, because that's what he does. He complains about everything. He's already been complaining a little bit. Brett Kavanaugh recently sided with the liberals on something, and he blasted him. So it doesn't mean that they have to rule one way or the other. It's just their expectation, right? I mentioned that this happens quite often, actually. The liberal stalwarts, and there always are justices that do fall in line, ideologically speaking. And there's only like one or two on each side on the court at any given time. So the stalwarts on the D side were Justice Ginsburg, and then Justice Sotomayor. On the Republican side, it's Alito and Clarence Thomas. And the other ones just kind of, there is no pattern. I also mentioned that what's also interesting about the court is that they are it's a very, very select group of people. And they behave as such. It's a small group. They're very private. Even in their private lives, they're very private. They don't really go out in public. They definitely don't align themselves with any kind of political party or any kind of ideology. They don't talk to press. And they end up making some very interesting alliances on the court itself. One of the most interesting ones I thought was Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia. Both of them have passed away since. Scalia was very much a Constitution purist. Amy Coney Barrett is considered that or Barrett is also considered that, a purist. If it's not written in the Constitution, then you shouldn't do it. Now, the Constitution's an old document, right? So there should be a little bit of interpretation. I would even say that Amy Coney Barrett is right of Antonin Scalia. So, and then another interesting one that I think is very, very important for us right now, just to make sure that the court stays as impartial as it should be, is Chief Justice Roberts and Elena Kagan are also very close. And they confer a lot and they collaborate. And so, again, you have these different alliances on the court that make it work. I think that the Democrats, if they regain control of Congress and the White House, that the retribution, if you will, for Amy Coney Barrett will not be packing the court, but will be making DC a state. I think that happens almost immediately if Democrats regain control, because it's so easy to do. That's pretty easy to do. And the idea would be two senators and then a representative of Congress or in the House. And, as big cities go, it's pretty liberal. So that's what I think. Then people will say, what about Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico, sure. DC is a little bit different because people come to DC, they know DC, they visit DC. It's something that it's tangible. So you would get very little political pushback on this. So one other thing I wanted to mention about the courts is, so the tax return issue. I don't know if you guys caught this, but the Supreme Court has signaled that they will take up this issue about Trump's tax returns. And Trump very, very honestly expects that the justices that he nominated will side with him. And he says that all the time. So there's nothing. So the other thing is, in the Trump era, you got to point this out. Trump can't fire any justice. Does not work that way. Will never work that way. The only time or the only body that can remove a Supreme Court justice is Congress. And they have to go through an impeachment process. They have to vote for removal. So the only time it's ever happened in our history was when a Supreme Court justice was impeached but not removed. So Trump can't fire anybody. All right, he might try, and he wants. Right now, you hear that he wants to fire Bill Barr and he wants to fire Esper over at DOD. He's wanting to fire everybody right now. But
hey, Chris,
yeah.
Just as we talk about all these, kind of extraordinary actions, do you think there's any realistic possibility that if Trump were to lose the election in a relatively significant way, kind of unappealable, do you think that he might resign before January 20th and have Pence pardon him of all crimes and misdemeanors?
Yeah.
Which is similar to what Ford did for Nixon.
Right. Okay, so here's what, again, if Trump loses, first of all, let's take that for a minute. And we might have covered this on the first lecture thing. If Trump loses, what happens then? Right? Now, there will be a little bit of, depending on how big of a margin. Hopefully it's a big enough margin where, there's no room for doubt. But there will probably be there will be some legal grandstanding. And by the way, both sides are very prepared for this. Okay, very prepared for this. So I think that Trump either, there's a couple scenarios. I think he resigns. First of all, he's not going to do, this is another thing that America should be expecting. He will not do the traditional transfer of power things that presidents do on their way out. You guys know they bring in, the president will bring in the president-elect, sit down with him, have a press conference, welcome, blah, blah, blah. And then there will be also, the inauguration itself. There's a role for the outgoing president. Trump will not do any of that.
Thank God.
So he also, he could resign. Pence can pardon him. Especially if the Supreme Court rules against him in this tax return issue, it could happen. I'm convinced that that's the main reason why Trump wants to stay in office, so he can avoid any kind of indictments. Now, some of this stuff is New York State, right? So he can't be pardoned for all of it, right, Bill? Is that right?
That's right, but that was true with Nixon too. And I think there would be kind of a gentleman's agreement, if you will. And I know using the term referring to Trump is a little bit extreme, but I think in the interests of the country, I think that's what happened with Nixon, that people just said, okay, it's over, he's out. We need to move on. We need to bring the country back together. Let's not get involved in all this. Because particularly with somebody like Trump, he could just move to Russia. I mean, God knows. So I think if he were pardoned by Pence, I think the state attorney generals would just kind of let it go.
Right.
That would be my guess.
Well, and that could, and they could make a deal, right? Which is, okay, he can get pardoned. By the way, it's worth pointing out, the president can only pardon people for federal crimes. Okay. That's all he can do. Okay, so that's worth pointing out. When it's funny because when Trump used to say, I could go on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I'd get away with it. And, the idea was, well, somebody would, if they did try to indict him, somebody would pardon him. Well, I mean, isn't the last I looked, murder was a state crime, and I don't know if they could totally get away with that. But there also would probably be a deal about Trump going away. Like he would have to go away. And I don't know if that means leaving the country. I just mean he would have to retreat from public life. That would be part of the deal in terms of not indicting him on a state level. But I actually think, to your point, you brought it up, Bill, that he might leave the country. I think that he spent a good part of this 4 years trying to set himself up in other countries. Not necessarily Russia, although I think he's tried. I think he has, it's more believable that it would be in the Mideast somewhere, Saudi Arabia or Turkey. They've been quietly setting up shop, if you will, the Trump organization in Turkey. I could see him doing that. Now, if he stays put, I think he'll try to be a Republican kingmaker, that part of that arm of the party. He'll try to get into media. I don't know what that looks like for him. I don't think the Murdochs will let him take over Fox. I think he'll try to start his own media company. So there's a whole lot. He doesn't have a mainstream path to media or fame anymore. Do you know what I mean by that? He's not going to be on The Apprentice anymore. He's not he's not going to be on any kind of reality show. He's going to have to be in the shadows, if you will, doing media. I was talking to my husband about, Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh, as you know, far right conservative talk show host, very offensive guy. But anyway, he's very ill. He has advanced lung cancer, very ill. And they're all those folks in that world are jockeying for that job. Okay. And I was saying to my husband, I was like, I wonder if he wants to, take Rush Limbaugh's job. And my husband was like, there's no way they wouldn't let him do that, because there's people that have been in line and that kind of thing. So I think, that's what I kind of think that happens with Trump. If he loses. If he wins, oh my gosh, hold on, right? I'm going to take a couple questions. Hold on, let me find one. The thing about Trump winning another 4 years, what happens then? Not good. I think he'll try to dismantle the media. I think he will become more egregious with kind of blurring the lines in terms of ethics. I think he'll do more to promote conspiracies and disinformation in a way that is so dangerous and divisive that our political system may not recover. I know that sounds dire, but I actually believe that. I think it could get really bad. Now, pardons, somebody mentioned pardons. I think that Trump will try to sell some pardons. Absolutely. So that should be expected for sure. The thing is as we're learning from the New York Times, he doesn't have a ton of money. And now a lot of his notes are coming due, and he has no way of making any money right now. So it's unless he leaves the country. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of what he does after this. Yeah, he could remove term limits. That would be hard. The only thing that might keep him in line if he wins again is Congress. Only because that's trending a little bit more towards Democrats, and that's not unusual. Usually the people seem to like opposite parties controlling one or the other. You'll see this a lot. In 2008, Obama, it was a wave, it was a dim wave, the House, the Senate, the White House, and then next election cycle, the Republicans won the House. So it usually works that way, where one or the opposite party controls either Congress or the White House. That's the way the people like it. So Congress might keep him in check a little bit, but it's not going to address the primal issue, which is him. He's so divisive. He lies all the time. He misleads all the time. He tries to divide. I mean, that's his MO. That's all he's done.
term limits, by the way, are in the Constitution now after Franklin Roosevelt. So it would require a constitutional amendment, which would mean not only Congress, but 3/4 of the states.
Yes.
And you know, the Equal Rights Amendment never got approved. I don't think there's any way in hell that they would get 75% of the states to approve removal. So the only good news is if he's reelected, it's 4 years, assuming we survive it, and then he has to go.
And
but
I've heard this, well, absolutely. And I've heard this idea, which is kind of a Putin move, which is, okay, so he can't run for president. That's not allowed, but he, basically runs somebody for president, like his son, for example.
Right.
And then his son may be president, but he still controls it.
Right.
So there's that. And look, these are things, and again, it's worth pointing out, these are things that we, hypothetically spoke of, laughed about, or whatever. But with Trump, it's, you can't say it hasn't crossed his mind, right? So I'm going to read a question. This is about the pandemic. The pandemic drew attention to the different responsibilities between governors and the executive branch. So, okay, this is two questions in one, I think. About the question is what are your thoughts about how much of pandemic matters should be national versus state run? So it's true. A lot of things, a lot of aid and protection that you have or receive in times of need are state resources. That's true. But in this particular instance, we needed a very cohesive, unified message from the top, because it was a national issue. And it's so easy, and politicians do this, to, kind of shrug off responsibilities. Well, New York's having a big problem, but, in Montana, we don't even know it's, that's not even a thing here, but and then it was obviously said and predicted that Montana, it would get there soon enough, right? So it was very important when you are talking about managing people's behavior, that there is a cohesive message from the top. So yes, do I think there should have been a national general message about how to act and how to approach? And I think also the president responsibility was to kind of, buck people up about this and try to and get them ready for what might happen next. And also, people do expect information to come out of the White House. I'm trying to think of another example of this. So let's take the BP oil spill. Do you guys remember the BP oil spill? It wasn't nearly the kind of tragedy or issue that, the pandemic represents, but this was something that the White House could not really do anything about. But they were the ones kind of managing the effort on how giving people information, helping people know what was going to happen next, and then just generally providing some reassurance. So I think that absolutely there should be a joint effort, but the main message needs to come nationally. Did that answer your question? Because I completely agree with that. Okay. I'm trying to. So the state of the race right now.
1 second, I think Anne had a point. Anne, your mic is muted.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
Thanks, William. Yeah, muted intentionally. I didn't want to interrupt you, Kristen. Sorry. I want to take you away from this conversation a bit. I mean, it's still really related, but I want to just know kind of your thoughts and how you think, this absolute disregard for the executive powers or taking advantage of executive powers has started to influence other countries that have similar systems of government. So for example, like say Nigeria has a federal system of government somewhat similar to the US, and you can see sort of that similar abuse of like power. I mean, nepotism is not half as bad, or it almost doesn't exist maybe in the US, right? But of course, like you mentioned, maybe Trump trying to put his son forward or whatnot. But I just want to get like your sense or your thoughts on how you think that the US's executive operations right now is influencing like other countries who have or who run like a similar system of government, just from your experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the US, especially the US system of government, our democracy has been an example to the world. Not to mention how democracy bucks up capitalism and makes for a strong secure, how do I say, it influences the way we secure our borders and just generally makes for a government that people trust and is effective. Obviously, there's room for improvement. It's always been an example. So when the US has, and this has been such a departure from what we've seen in the past in terms of our leaders, that yes, absolutely, people take notice. And I do think that you'll have a few copycats. Now, what happens sometimes is that things go badly fast for some of these other governments that are trying to mimic. And it's not that way here because we're just so entrenched in how we do operate. Like I said, the guardrails are still there. They've been bumped and they've been bruised, but they're still there. But yes, absolutely. I think it's happens to be a government that other countries aspire to have. So yeah, it's taken look, I mean, I could start talking about our reputation worldwide and how it's tarnished and the work that's going to have to be done there. And we can talk about that the rest of the day. There's so much there. And look, the reason why did it all happen with Trump? Because Trump only cares about himself. That's the thing. That is the one thing that is different. Sure, we've had presidents who were a little bit too political, or we've had presidents who were a little too paranoid, or we've had presidents that weren't that smart, or whatever. I mean, however you want to, but they were still at their core decent people who were in it for the right reasons. Trump has never been that person. And that's why I said earlier, we're going to start seeing laws that will curb the power, which may or may, I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Because that's not kind of how we've done things in the past. One of the things that I noticed, and again, it's in the New York Times today, so you can read it yourself, but one of the things that they're going to emphasize with these new laws, or these proposed new laws, is, Trump has never divested himself from his business. And so unfortunately, right, you don't know who it's not really clear who he's trying to take care of. Same thing with the tax returns. There's never been a law that says that the president has to release their tax returns. It was just something that people did, right? Because it was the right thing to do. When Trump had that big display of fireworks and all that during the Republican convention from the White House, and I can't tell you how many people would say to me, somebody needs to go arrest him from doing that from the White House. I was like, there's no law. He's not breaking a law. It's just really bad. It's just a really bad look to do that kind of thing from the White House, because the White House is the people's White House, Democrat, Republican. It's not, you know what I mean? So does that answer your question?
If I could just jump in for a second,
Yeah.
I'll give you my view. I think I think it's an observation, Ann, that I think Trump has been a role model for strong men, literally strong men, in Poland, in Turkey, in Brazil, Putin, Xi, China's actions in Hong Kong. I think he has legitimized, in some ways, the kind of Superman leader model. Obviously, not everybody supports it. Not everybody thinks it's a good thing. But in the same way, I would argue, and I'm really not, you guys would be surprised how moderate I am. So this will sound like it's very political, but it's really not. It's an observation. Contrasted with when Obama was elected, the view around the world of the United States, based on polls, it was way off the charts positive. Many people who were not all that sympathetic to the United States became much more, well, maybe they're not so bad anyway. So yes, the US economy, US military, US power has always made it very influential. But at least from my studies and my own observations and my own readings, the president and how the president acts in the US strongly influences behaviors in other countries around the world, for good or for bad.
Right.
So that's a good illustration. It says nothing, whether Obama did a great job or a bad job or an in-between job or an okay job, but the way he carried himself as president toward other countries increased our standing in the world. There's no question that Trump has decreased our standing in the world and empowered the kinds of regimes that historically we have opposed publicly. I mean, maybe sometimes surreptitiously through the CIA, we've propped them up for other reasons, but at least our public stance was democracy, what today's topic, balance of power, having governments that are accountable to the people.
And, it's a good point on kind of an extension of that, it's almost like there's been, for a while now, there's been this desire by some Americans to have somebody who's not, your standard politician, right? Or who hasn't spent a life in politics or public service and comes from from a different, from business or from another aspect of American life to kind of shed a fresh eye on things. The problem, and I always go back to this. The problem with that is that that's just not how our government is set up. It's just, remember when Trump was talking about Greenland and swapping, I want to buy Greenland. What? Seriously? I mean, it's like, it doesn't work that way. First of all, you just do not unilaterally have control of everything. It's never been that way. US presidents have so much power worldwide, and they influence in ways that can't be quantized. I mean, it's incredible, but in the wrong hands, obviously, it can turn into a really bad thing, and it can, as Bill said, it can just make us look really bad. Not to, it's just horrible.
Hey, so Kristen, we're running short on time. Can you tell us what's going to happen in the election, please?
Yes. Okay. So right now, and again, I always say this in my class, elections are snapshots in time. Okay. They're never to be repeated. Okay. So just remember that. And that's why when, you hear a lot in politics, well, if the election were held today, because it can change. All right. So keep that in mind. So right now, Joe Biden is polling really well. And what I mean by that, it's not unlike what we saw in 2016 about this time. But the difference is that Joe Biden is leading with key demographics where Hillary Clinton did not lead at all. And he's leading in critical states. Which obviously, because Electoral College, there's certain what we call battlegrounds that are very much in play. that weren't before. You've heard a lot about the money. There's just been so much money being poured into Democratic politics. They can play everywhere. They can be on the air. They can go into states, be on the air because they have so much money. Trump is hurting with money. That's always an indicator. It's not the indication. It's an indicator of the kind of support that, or kind of how things are trending. Trump has had a couple times, a couple things happen recently that would allow him to change the subject, if you will. He's just such his own worst enemy. He cannot allow it to happen. It's going to be interesting to see how he reacts in tomorrow night's debate, because he can't help himself. You know what I mean? He has this, and he's angry right now. Just look at his Twitter feed. I mean, he's very angry. So do I think that it's going to be called on election night? If Biden wins Florida, it's over. If Biden wins Florida, it's over. And we will be able to call Florida on election night because they are allowed to start counting ballots before the 3rd. Pennsylvania will not be able to call Pennsylvania probably election night because they cannot start counting ballots until the 3rd, like early vote, absentee, that kind of thing. North Carolina, Arizona, and Georgia, toss-ups. That's kind of unheard of. Barack Obama won North Carolina in 2008, but these are conservative states. The Kansas Senate race is the Kansas Senate race, I can't believe this, is very competitive. The Democrat could win. Trump has seen such a large drop-off with college-educated women, well, women in general. I mean, women have just been fleeing Trump. We saw this in 2018. It's continuing. I mean, it's huge. It's like a free fall. You know, and he talks about it a little bit at these rallies, and very, very poorly, I might add, but he does talk about how his support with women is eroding. And then older white people, older white voters. And I think that's all of COVID. So right now, it looks good for Biden. I hate to make any predictions. We've been here before, but it's different. It's different. Not to mention the pollsters, the national pollsters, and the folks that poll on these matters have learned a good lesson in 2016, and they changed their methodology. And I happen to know this just because my husband does this for a living. They changed their methodology, and they go out of their way to oversample Republican voters or rural voters, or, you know, however you want to quantify them or qualify them. And so, and Biden's still up 8 points in some of these battleground states. There was a question about, do we have the capacity to take on a Trump challenge to the election results? Yes, we do. One of the things that I think has been important, and it's been done quietly, it hasn't been done with a megaphone, so it could have been lost, was that the military has already said, we're not going to get involved here. In other words, the only way that Trump can stay in office, like really stay in office, is if he has the backing of the military, and they've already said no, he doesn't have our backing. So, you know, he'll do whatever he can to disrupt and, you know, cast doubt on. But you know what? Here's the problem. You know, even his own supporters don't trust what he says. Even his own supporters says he lies. Even his own supporters thinks that he makes things up. Okay, that's, you know, obviously this kind of behavior catches up with you. After a while, nobody believes what you're going to say, or you're saying, or nobody believes you. So we'll have to wait and see. Right now, Biden leads in Florida, like, depending on the poll, by like 2 or 3 points, which is within the margin of error. So it's basically a toss-up. It will be about turnout, and we'll see. But if he went, the scenario that I'd like to see is them calling Florida on election night, and then if that for Biden, and if that happens, it's over. Does that help?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. But in my own analysis, I'm granting Florida to Trump just for purposes of worst case. And then, unfortunately, it kind of centers on Pennsylvania because Wisconsin is close. But if he loses Wisconsin, I also think he wins Arizona.
Yeah.
So then Wisconsin doesn't matter. So that the only state that really, and I give Trump North Carolina, give Trump Ohio, give Trump Texas.
Yeah.
If Pennsylvania goes Biden wins. And as you say, though, if we're down to Pennsylvania, we may have to wait for a while.
Yeah. And so, and then if that, of course, will raise all the, doubt because Arizona too, and if when you look at 2018, it took a week to call that race. Nobody cared because it was just a Senate race, but they're actually used to counting votes. They have a lot of part-time residents, that kind of thing, like Florida. And so they count votes slowly, but it's not, there's nothing wrong. It's just they just count votes slowly. So even in that Senate race in 2018, it was a week. And the other thing that I want to point out about that Senate race is that in 2018, the challenger was ahead on election night.
I know. Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah. So the person that actually won didn't win until after the votes were counted.
But in this case, I think Kelly's so far ahead.
Oh, yeah.
I think that might, it might have an effect on the Trump vote there.
Yeah. And yeah, so absolutely. And so there's also a big Senate race. There's two in Georgia. So that also helps because these are normal Democrats. When I say normal Democrats, they're Democrats that Republicans
could vote for.
Yeah. Conventional Republican can vote for. That's the other thing that the Democrats, I think, have done a really good job of, is come up with, that's why Kansas is in play. It's because there's a very normal Democratic candidate. Yeah.
So if you had to bet money, if your money was on the line, what do you bet?
Well, I'm a little, that's hard. I would put my money on Biden, but let's see what happens. Let's see what happens with this debate.
Do you think the Leslie Stahl on Sunday is going to make a difference?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's going to make a difference, but it's going to reinforce what a lot of women think about him. I will. The only thing that this Republicans have is this Supreme Court appointment nomination / confirmation. They're going to try to do some Hunter Biden stuff, but you've got Rudy out there. He's the messenger on this thing. It just totally, nobody listens to it.
And Breitbart, that's where he got it from.
And so, that whole New York Post thing, I mean, I know I'm getting yeah.
Oh, it's good though. I mean, when the guy who is the source of Giuliani is a guy who's under indictment for fraud.
I know. I mean,
it does make you think, and it's from a hard drive that was dropped off in April of 2019.
Exactly. Yeah.
If this was such hot stuff, why didn't it come out before? Why does it come out now like a week before the election?
Right. And the other thing that you're starting to see is these Republicans kind of jumping ship. Because, and this is very obvious with Mitch McConnell and the stimulus package. And he's like, we're not going to do that now. Even though Nancy Pelosi's working real hard to get it through. And Mitch McConnell's like, we're not going to do that. The Republicans majority leader in the Senate is saying, we don't want to do that. So obviously that would be a win for Trump if he could do that. But obviously Mitch McConnell doesn't think it's important, and he doesn't seem to care if the president cares. Yeah. So there's a lot of moving parts. Yeah. So.
That's interesting. I mean, not to just give us 1 second on that, and then we'll let everybody go. So why is McConnell doing that? I mean, giving money to the American people presumably would be good for every elected official, right? You're running for office and you announce every American is going to get $1,200 in the mail and the states are going to.
Yeah.
Why is McConnell saying no? And why
So-
are some Republican senators saying no?
Because first of all, they've turned back into budget hawks, right?
Right.
And then they've decided that they do believe, there is a group of them that believe that they will not, that stimulus checks like this discourage people from actually working.
So you think it's philosophical, not
Yeah.
political?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I don't, there's not a great reason for it. And the other thing that's so disingenuous about McConnell is that he claims that they can't get anything done because of partisan, but then they're totally, they totally cleared the way for this, nomination. So that looks disingenuous too. McConnell has been for probably about, well, since, June, July, he's been planning for Trump losing, and he's just been desperately trying to hold on to the Senate.
Yeah.
And maybe he can. We'll see. I do think, there's a couple of Democrats that will probably lose. Alabama, he'll probably lose. Doug Jones, I think is his name. But yeah, there's a whole, I think Lindsey, there's a good chance Lindsey Graham loses. So
You think so?
I do.
That would be
That would
great.
be great. I know. Okay. All right. I could go on, and I really enjoy this. And
Thank you so much. And we're going to see you after the election,
yeah,
right?
and then I'll talk about what everybody did right or wrong.
Hopefully it'll be a celebration.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. Anyway, thanks so much. And you can get, if anybody wants to send me a question or just, offline, my email's out there, and I'm happy to talk, carry this on.